Great. Okay. So I think we can start. Maybe Fulco and Brian will join us later. Okay, let's start. Okay. Something. Wait. We have got other people incoming. Hello. Okay, let's start. Okay, thanks for everyone for being here on this panel about the Euro War Games anthology and a meeting with some of the contributors to the anthology itself. Just a quick word of introduction. We have here Jan Heinemann with us. It was one of the co-curators with me and Fred Serval. Fred Serval is on the server, is engaged in another panel. Okay, also we have the last few contributors present. And I want also to thank the contributors that have managed to be here with us today. Andrea Angiolino, Paul Hudson, and Folko Ranke, and Ronald Shepard, Giuseppe Tamba, and Brian Train. And we will have a short introduction between me and Jan about the book and the project and the general project. And then we will leave the floor to the contributors for a short exposition of the articles, and also we will be open to question. I also remind everyone to the contributors that they have 7 to 8 minutes each to keep things organized, because we are quite a lot of people, and we have this time slot, for which we are very, very thankful to the SD EastCon 2025 Winter Quarters online convention for this space that they gave us. Okay, so just to begin, Jan, do you want to introduce a bit, to make a general introduction to the project of why a French, a German, and Italian guy wanted to create an anthology, and why this is not a bad joke?
No, it turned out to be a great joke. Yeah, actually, it all started with a discussion you, Ricardo, and Fred had on Dan's YouTube channel, No Enemies Here. A discussion about wargaming cultures, primarily focused on hobby wargaming in Italy and France. And I think that was in May 2020. And then afterwards, I got in touch with you and thought there's so much to talk about and to share about, and so little is known from country to country in Europe, and then beyond Europe, of course, as well, when it comes to the wargaming culture that has a long history here and is very diverse. And that's something we found we need to tackle in some way. And the idea was then relatively quickly made that we should do an anthology to bring people together and share perspectives and have it be an especially sort of accessible anthology or book, in that we wanted to gather contributions by not only sort of academic scholars, but also by gamers, by game designers, by people who talk about games and all that sort of stuff. So to really capture the whole community, and then also have it be in the end product. Yeah, I guess sort of on the lower price and comparatively seen to, let's say, academic volumes, which often like a very
Yeah,
expensive.
just like the one that I published,
Right.
or Solemn Below, and so on.
Yeah, right. So then, yeah, we just published our call for papers. We got lots of contributions. We discussed them all. Some were fitting, some not so much, and then began to sort of structure the abstracts we had received into three sort of main categories. Got back to the contributors, and they wrote the articles. Then we initially planned to relatively quickly publish the book, only that then the pandemic hit and sort of, yeah, became a bit of an issue in several regards, as that all the work took way longer than it should have initially, and then that there were also problems with like finding a proper sort of publisher, and then publishers we already had on board then sort of disappeared on us. And eventually Nuts Publishing came up. Laurent Coupeau, who unfortunately can't be here tonight with us, he stepped up and he really said, and we sort of have to thank him for that. I think he identified the purpose of the book, that it is a sort of product coming from the community for the community, and it's not about sort of making a whole lot of money with it. It's more about like getting it out there and making it available. And yeah, we had then the Kickstarter in November, December last year. 303 backers supported the project, and by now it's out and about, and it's also available now after the Kickstarter on the Nuts Publishing store if you are interested to get a copy.
Yeah, it really exists. This book really exists, guys. People. Okay, I also want to point out the full title of the book, because something that something might be a bit misleading, because we internally we refer to these work as Euro War games, and people say, okay, you are speaking about hybrids. Yeah, it is not just about hybridization. It is not just about the relationship between war games and Euro games, because the entire title is Euro War Games: The History, State, and Future of Professional and Public Wargaming in Europe. So Euro War Games is more like war games in Europe. And yes, there are Euro War Games, there are hybrids, okay, that's fine, but they are not the sole object of the book. And also because we wanted to give a broader vision of what wargaming really is in a global sense, because we are all used to think about modern commercial and also a bit professional wargaming as something really centered on the US or on the English-speaking world in general. And that's fine, because this is where modern commercial war games in our era exist mainly. But nowadays, and this has always been present, but in the last decades, there was a very definitive trend towards having a broader production of war games all over the world. We just wanted to focus on Europe, but Jan, Fred, and I, we are just speaking about, well, maybe why don't we do another volume? And oh, there is another big chunk of the world called Asia. What's happening in Asia right now? In Japan, in China, in Vietnam? And the answer is they are wargaming like crazy. They're great producers, authors, and titles and publishers, but also the great trend of development also in Africa. We have seen many African designers proposing games about African history, and not just African history, about history in general with another perspective. So this was essentially the reason why we made this work. Jan, if you agree, I will leave the floor to our contributors so that they can expose their articles to us. And the first one, in strictly alphabetical order, is Andrea Angiolino. My dear friend, Andrea.
Thank you. So, what I did, I give my experience actually about elegance and simplicity, playability, and detail. My experience is linked to Wings of War, that was a card game that was released 20 years ago exactly. And then it went quite successfully, luckily, and it became a miniature game that now is known as Wings of Glory. So what happened? I tried to think about the key elements that brought to this little success, and I first of all thought about old wargaming, the wargame from the 70s and the 80s, the wonderful games we played by SPI and Avalon Hill, full of rules and charts and whatever. actually, I liked a lot Napoleon Last Battles and very streamlined systems, simple and effective. But at that time, the key element that was considered by players to evaluate realism was the size of the rule book, and that was not so good. Actually, the problem for designers seemed to be either we put a lot of detail to have a very realistic game, or we simplify a lot to have a very playable game. And so an easy game was not considered well by old grognards. And after that, the problem was that people lost the ability to read real books. When I was a kid, I had no problem to read
Andrea?
Risk rules and explain to friends and play. But now an adult may have this problem, I noticed. That's why we were used to manuals with a videotape recorder, for example. We studied the manual and then we could install and use it. Now we just try with the telephone. And the same for game. When arcades come, we started to learn games just putting a coin inside, playing for maybe 40 seconds, learning something, putting another coin, playing for 2 minutes, and so on, without any rules to be studied. So I wondered if it was possible to make a simulation game without giving up the details, but avoiding people to have a lot of rules to study and a lot of details to handle, as in a video game where there is a lot of detail, but it's handled by the machine, not by the player. No more tables, charts, rules to remember, points to spend, and everything. And this is what I tried to achieve. This is what I analyzed after. It was quite an instinctive design, but then reasoning about it. That's the analysis I did. So what I did was not to oversimplify. I followed a couple of very good examples. Blue Max was already a simplified board game coming out in 1983, I think, with complete routes for the airplane to be chosen in every turn. But still, it had a 10-step turn with 10 different things to do along the turn. It was the right direction, but there was still work to do in that direction. The most elegant of all was by Alfred Leonard, The Ace of Aces, the two booklets with all the possible facing of two planes at every distance, and you choose the maneuver and you went to another page with a different sight to see if you were shooting at the opponent or not, or tailing him or whatever. And that was a very brilliant design. And that was maybe the kind of elegance I tried to achieve. But the problem with Ace of Aces, it was very good to be played in two. I wanted a multiplayer game. So I did actually a card game in which you can actually choose maneuvers from a deck of cards, and then you can fly your plane, moving your cards according to the arrows that are on those cards. And the rules are very simple. We had 6 years old plane, and you just choose 3 cards in secret. Then you put the card in front of the plane and the plane on top of the card, and your plane actually flies on the table, like in the example here from the rules. After that, with the ruler, you see if you reach or not the opponent to shoot. and everything is there. You don't have any point to spend to maneuver or to move, but the spud here is far quicker than the Fokker triplane because there are longer arrows, and the Fokker triplanes can do some more agile maneuvers because he has 20 cards instead of 16 to choose among, and some are very sharp turns on the right because it has an engine, a rotary engine that stand the plane tends to go to the right, so he has those two narrow curves. And the Camel has three, the Fokker only two because the tail corrected the detail, and so on. Everything is inside the card. You choose 3 cards and move, and it's the materials to keep all the details inside. I called it hidden complexity, and now I have just 1 minute more, so I'll try to be very short. After analyzing it, I called it hidden complexity. Even in shooting, you just take one card at short range or two at short range, one at long, and everything is in there. If you hit, how many points, if there is any special damage, if there is a jamming, everything is very simple and inside the materials. And this approach can keep a lot of details, difference between planes and everything, without long rules or a lot of to handle on the game. Last note, there is another very interesting approach, design by effect. That's already another path to simplify games, making it simpler to play for new players or for just old grognards that have not so much time anymore for family and so on. Mine is not a design by effect. I design by causes. I just try to keep all those causes and details inside the materials, not to hinder playability. That's
Design
it.
by causes. I really like that definition.
Okay.
Okay, thanks to Andrea, and his contribution is entitled "Detail Boosts Playability in Board Wargaming: His Personal Experience as a Designer," as we have seen. Thanks to Andrea, and now is the turn of Paul Watson. What makes a wargame historical? A case study of the Peloponnesian War, and this is very interesting because we're touching a very peculiar topic. When do we call a game historical, and what does it mean to call it that way? Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you, Riccardo. I'm very daunted coming after Andrea because I've had many happy hours playing Wings of War, and it's really impressive to hear the designer speak so succinctly about it. I'm going to try and share my screen, which may or may not prove to be a successful project. Here we are. Share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so you already gave the title, Riccardo. Jan talked about culture. We consume an enormous amount of history as wargamers, and the way we consume it is a cultural question. We are really focused on history. When you talk to another wargamer, you can always say that's not historical. That's always a point that you're allowed to make. You can compare something like Carcassonne. It looks historical. It's about a historically named city. But if I say that river didn't run there, or you wouldn't get churches that close together, that's got nothing to do with any analysis I can make of Carcassonne. It has got something to do with an analysis I would make of a war game. I was interested to think about what do we mean when we say that is historical or that's not historical. And I looked at the Peloponnesian War as an example. The starting point was the war game club that I used to go to when I lived in Amsterdam, the wonderful Six Shooters War Games Club. And there we organized several figures games about battles in the Peloponnesian War. And that was why I then followed on looking at board war games of the same period. In particular, we organized refights of 2 battles, the Battle of Amphipolis in the north of the Aegean, and the picture shows the Athenians on the right attacking the Spartans who are defending the city, and the Battle of Mantinea in the Peloponnese. We used two different sets of rules, De Bellis Antiquitatis, which despite their beautiful Latin name is a British set of rules, and Art de la Guerre, which is derived from DBA and is a French set of rules. How did we talk about history when we were doing these things? Above all, we talked about factual accuracy. Look at that wall. The Spartans were not able to hold the wall for very long against the Athenians, according to the set of rules we had. Was that reasonable? At Mantinea, most of the hoplites had armor, but the Spartans have some faster, unarmored hoplites. How do you deal with them within the rules? And looking more broadly, that kind of discussion is very common and very dominant even in the figure wargaming community. I'm involved in some discussion about whether we might move to the next stage of DBA rules, and I've put a quote below, somebody talking about whether hoplites could beat Psiloi or Psiloi would beat hoplites. People come with historical examples to make their points. So factual accuracy is the most important thing in the historical discussions in that world. The second thing, which is important, is about feeling right. So the people who designed the DBA, which were the main rules that we played with, were saying, we want you to be the general. And as the general, with your army in front of you, you can see them pushing forward or falling back. You don't record detailed scores in terms of points or numbers of casualties. That's what you would see if you were the general in an ancient or medieval battle with 10,000 soldiers on either side. So there was a very strong emphasis on feeling right. Of course, standing on top of a board that is 2 foot by 2 foot square with 50 figures on each side, and it's silent, is not the same thing as a battle, but still there is something about playing games with figures which get you in the mood of getting things to feel right. I then moved on to look at board war games of the Peloponnesian War, and I looked at 5 games that covered the whole war, which I've listed here, covering quite a long period. I'll say in brackets, I really wanted to cover 3 games from the French magazine Vivictis by the designer Frederick Bay. All of these games are American or Canadian designers, and perhaps this tells us something about the European wargaming culture. I couldn't find designers' notes. I couldn't find Board Game Geek discussion. So I couldn't find material to analyze how people speak about those games. But I do strongly recommend them if you're interested in the Peloponnesian War. What did I find in looking at how wargamers talk about these board war games? They still talk about factual accuracy, but less devotedly. I will make this, I'll mention this quote because I love it. I'd love to have sources for every comment I make about a game or some aspect of history, but who pays for my time to write it or your time to read it? You would never hear a miniatures wargamer speaking about the need to give your sources with that kind of dismissal. On top of historical accuracy, there's quite a lot of discussion around these games about scope, about whether you're covering the right thing in order to be able to historically tell the story of that war, or whether you need to cover more. Mark Herman, 2 of the 5 games that I looked at were by Mark Herman, and both of them in different ways try to bring politics in what would otherwise be a military simulation, on the basis that a lot of the things that happened, such as the Athenian invasion of Sicily in 415, would never happen in a rational military-based world, but happened for political reasons, which you need to reproduce if you're going to tell the story of the war. So that's one way in which people writing about historicalness in board war games are speaking about something other than accuracy as such. A second one is the question of scriptedness. So wargame designers, it seems to me, have to have a double requirement. On the one hand, their game has to be accurate. It has to be able to simulate what actually happened. If Alexander the Great gets all the way from the Granicus to the borders of the Indian Empire, beating everybody in the way at the end of the 4th century BC, the game has to be able to simulate that. At the same time, and this is scriptedness, it mustn't always give that result. It must be possible for the person playing Alexander to do something different, and of course it must be possible for the Persians to beat Alexander. So some criticism of some of the games that I looked at was that they were too scripted, that the Athenian strategy had to be naval raiding and the Spartan strategy had to be trying to starve Athens out. By contrast, the question of feel, which was quite important in discussion about board war games, was less important in the discussions about, it was important in figures games, less important in discussion of board war games. And I think that's a pity. I have a quote in French, so you can laugh at my French accent. Si nous jouons à des jeux d'histoire, c'est pour qu'ils nous racontent une histoire, sinon l'histoire. So if we play history games, even if they're not going to tell us about history, they have to tell us a story. And telling us a story is about feel. So that's a difference I found in the culture of board war game and figure war game playing. In conclusion, we can't forget about factual accuracy. But I think board war games could go further in avoiding scriptedness. One example of that is the game Unhappy King Charles by Charles Vasey about the English Civil War, where many board war games have cards for random events that did happen, but he also has cards that allow things which never happened to happen. Second thing that I think both board and figure war games could look at is what Mark Herman argues for about widening scope. This is a picture of one of my 2 refights of Mantinea. I really need a pointer, but the actual battle took place in the top quarter of the table. The Spartans marched up the roads on the right. They formed up in front of the woods, and only then the allies, the Argives and the Athenians, attacked them. So the battle took place beyond the wood from our perspective. But when we played the game at the War Game Club, we got a big table, even though the armies were quite small, and we said, let's go back in time to the point when the Spartans are marching towards that point and offer both the Spartans and the Athenians different choices. So that's an example of expanding the scope in board war games, which worked well. And the third and final thing, board war games could pay more attention to who the players represent. I've got a picture of Alcibiades here. This is a counter from the old game, The Peloponnesian War by Stephen Newberg, but you don't really represent Alcibiades in that game. It's not at all clear who you do represent. I think it'd be more satisfying to play these games if it was. Thank you very much. I've finished.
Thank you very much. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Paul, and really thought-provoking case study about a very thought-provoking conflict for an historian that has the Peloponnesian War. Now, the next one is someone I know quite well because it is myself, and with my I will be. But short about my piece that is entitled Attack of the Hybrids, Wargames and Eurogames Divided Mechanics. So that is exactly the topic that we said, okay, this is not just about this topic, this book. Okay, this is exactly the one of the most, I'm not afraid to say one of the most controversial topics that we had in the book, because we understand that we're in something of a phase of a transitional phase in wargame design trends, and you have already seen so many different types of wargames in these on these connection demonstrations and live streams, etc. The fact is that many of those games are defined as hybrid. That is, hybrid game war games that are war games using also Euro games inspired mechanics like cards and pieces and deck building and I don't know, area majority. Yeah, my piece is exactly about those topics because the thing is that we have all those elements, and when we see them in a game, we are instantly led to believe, to define that game as an hybrid game just because there are those elements. And the problem is that by doing this, many times we lose a bit of focus because we get to be more focused on the mechanics and not on the content of the game. While the what I think is the best definition of simulation games is that they are games in which the content is much more important than the mechanics. So our first question is, what history are we going to represent? And then after that, how we are going to represent that history in a simulated form, in an interactive form with plausible results. Why do we choose certain mechanics? Why do we prefer a certain focus? And as Andrea said before, there are so many different choices, many different style choices, and simplicity and the high effectiveness of design, high effective design mechanics that most of the times are taken from Eurogames. Well, they are taken from Eurogames not just because the designer wants to make an hybrid game or wants to make a more accessible game or a more sellable game. Many times, simplicity is not the center of the topic. Simplicity is a byproduct of a very definite, of a very deliberate historiographical approach by the game designer on a certain title. That yes, with that it happens to be to become a hybrid Euro war game. But as I say in my article, what makes those Euro games inspired mechanics so special, so different from traditional wargame mechanics? Actually, the problem is that it is all it is all a matter of perception. First of all, historically, many of those mechanics that we now are calling Eurogames inspired mechanics, or Eurogames, even Eurogames survivor mechanics used in simulation, they are actually evolution of mechanics that were first experimented during the glory days of the SPI and the Avalon Hill and all the other great publishers. They're just evolution. Many times, the very same people, we have mentioned Mark Hammond, that are using those mechanics. And it's quite fun also. This is from a historical point of view. And another one is exactly because we see a lot of Euro games and we tend to say, okay, this mechanic is just taken from them, just taken straight from them, and then copy pasted to simulation games. A funny thing is that one of the critics that we received about the book, especially pointed to my contribution, and I'm quite happy but I know that it was, as I said, one of the most controversial. That said, okay, I do not agree with everything on the book. For example, Mazzini's contribution and Mazzini's idea that cards are linked to Eurogames. That is an overused trope, a cliche. And that is exactly my point, because it is all a cliche. Because when we see cards in card-driven games, we say, just like in Undaunted, but even before in We the People, and we say, okay, this is an Euro game mechanics. But it is a cliche because cards were used in many war games, many traditional war games, by traditional designers of the 70s as experimentation, as ways to better represent history. In conclusion, the art of my contribution is that we are not seeing, first of all, we are not seeing anything like a threat to traditional war games with hybrid war games. On the contrary, we are seeing a form of war games, a form of simulation games that can absolutely coexist with traditional simulation games. But also we are seeing a manifestation, a development of an ongoing trend of tradition, that is, of wargame design tradition, that is innovation, constant evolution. This is not anything new. This is the most surprising thing. That is absolutely nothing new. It has always been with us, this kind of innovation. Many of those mechanics were with us, maybe in some different forms, but really, it is nothing. It also, they have their issues, their problems. I also expose their problems in my contribution. Uh, they are uh, they are just design solutions that are used by game designers for a reason, because they want to give a particular they want to use a particular historiographical approach, but they are still war games because we are always speaking about the same thing. And so this was my my contribution. Yeah, I managed to stay on time. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Folco Rönke with this article about and yeah, this is a special section of our book about war game in Spain, because we have also a section dedicated to wargaming, to the wargaming scenes, the wargaming national wargaming scenes all around Europe. Folco, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ricardo. So, hello everyone. I feel a little bit sheepish about taking up any time here because this book, first of all, fantastic job. I've read every essay. This is a wonderful for our community, as you say, and also our record, because I'm going to be happy when people read this book 20 years from now. But this book has, as you've been listening, analytical, deeply analytical discussion, history of wargaming, and not just in Europe, theory of wargaming, well-sourced, scholarly work, and I have managed to sneak in a little bit of travelogue into all that, that is kind of in the sense of what did Volko do with his winter vacation, with snapshots of my friends. So I sure hope I don't go over. I hope if anything I can and be short of time, because I don't know that I kind of rise to the depth of investigation with my contribution. That said, I do have some holiday snaps to share with you. So if it's okay, I think I'll go ahead and try to stream that. So let me share my screen and then switch over. Okay, does that show up?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
Fine.
fine. My little piece in the book is about a particular war game convention that takes place in Badajoz, Spain, that I had the pleasure to attend several times. And Biotas is simply acorns. It's a kind of a local symbol, has to do with the local agricultural industry. And I hope it's interesting as a case. It may be overly anecdotal or overly inductive, but this one convention does seem to illustrate, perhaps epitomize what we've been seeing in war games in and from Europe over the last several years. And that's also kind of displayed by the participants in this con in terms of organizations, many of these being Spanish war game production houses that have a substantial audience outside Spain, including my country in the United States. This con began, let's see, what would the year have been, 2018, 2019, something like that, with 30 folks. The brainchild of Sergio Alama, who was a war game reviewer, a content creator online, decided to have a con that could be perhaps national, perhaps international. Started with 30. Next year it was 90 something. Next year it was 200 something. Then the COVID hit. It kept going, just as we're doing now with SD HistCon at this moment online, and it's still going in person today. So that seemed to mirror also what has been happening in the European wargaming community in general. I can't establish and prove that, but I can just talk about this one case. But that's kind of why I hope that this particular case of BiotaCon is interesting. And I'd like to start talking about it not with anything in Spain, but rather in Colombia. And going back to volume 1 in a series known as the Coin series, when I was trying to convince people that they would want to play a game about insurgency, And I was trying all kinds of tricks, like using European game style components, little wooden pieces and area maps and cards, of course, Ricardo, and solitaire play and whatever I could, whatever elegance and hidden complexity I could manage, which is I'm rather more modest in skill than Andre in that regard. However, to get to basically to say, hey, look, yeah, I know it's in Colombia and I know it's about insurgency and it's not usual thing, but it's interesting because I did think it was an undergamed area of warfare and history, and the particular story in Colombia I thought was fascinating, multifactional, political and violent, and it did not go well on the GMT Games pre-order system. It was kind of dragging, and in fact, so much so that Gene Billingsley, the president of GMT, time got onto Consim World, that haven of grognardism, and said, hey, Volko, he did Wilderness War, he did Labyrinth, he's a good designer. I'm surprised how guys aren't ordering this game, which was a little bit disturbing for me because I was trying to build this bandwagon to get the pre-orders to get the game made, and it seemed like that was going to knock the wheels off because Gene had just invited about 100 people to say why not to buy this product. And the answer was 99% of the answers were, I'm just not interested in this topic. And Gene had known that before. Series, that's good. That will help sell. Solitaire, that helps it sell. If the art is pretty, it will sell. But, insurgency and counterinsurgency in Colombia is just not the kind of thing that's going to attract the usual P500 order card. But it did ultimately get to the numbers it got made. And of course, now we have, I think, main series, and that doesn't count expansions, quadra games and titles by other companies. So we got, we built it, and here's the part. GMT's pre-orders at that time, I am told, were about one half, 2/3 rather domestic, and then half of that, 1/3 foreign. But for this game, that is to say, most people on P500 were US people. This game, it was the opposite. That only a third of the pre-orders that we did get were US people, the rest was foreign. And I don't think those were people interested in Colombia because they were in Colombia or even Latin America. There were almost certainly some Canadians and Australians and so forth in that mix. But my venture here is that the bulk of that were European wargamers. And so in a way, if I'm right on that, it's the European wargame community that ever allowed the coin series to happen. And that tells me something is happening here. There's something cultural about different wargame communities that make them more amenable to something different, maybe something new, maybe it's mechanically new, but certainly at least topically based on that survey on Consim World, that it doesn't have to be in your backyard happening to your country and your history that you learned in school to be interested in it as a war game in the board wargaming mass market. So with that kind of is another, I don't know, it's a buttress for me about why we should be interested in what is happening today in European wargaming, because it offers something different, some different innovations, some diversity of approaches, some diversity of interest. So with that, a little bit of the travelogue. So Bada Hoth is an interesting kind of place to gather and put a con. It's really off the beaten track, and it's in the province Extremadura. The English-speaking ear sounds like, well, that's already kind of extreme and hardship. It's kind of a frontier town, and I think Sergio and putting on had this kind of frontier, kind of an innovative, hey, we're just going to do our own thing out here and see if we can bring the world to us. It's actually, I found it kind of hard to get to Bada Hoth. Like I was going to, fly into Madrid and maybe rail or whatever, but I found at that time anyway, I guess that was 28. 2019. You couldn't take a train without changing a train to get to Bad Hoof, and that it surprised me a little bit because Bad Hoof is after all was quite important in Al-Andalus. It's the seat of an emirate. I was already working on my game Almoravid, but it comes down to it was kind of off the main Roman road. There was an important south road, Rita Augusta, now Merida, and that meant the medieval roads, as you can see there from. Also kind of side stepped Bad Hoof, and that's true for the highways and the rail today. But I found out I could do it the easy way. I just fly into Lisbon, which is a short hop from the US across the Atlantic, and then it's like a 2-hour bus ride right into Bad Hoof. And it is a great spot from a wargaming history point of view. The Moorish citadel is there. It is quite lovely in restoration. Was further being restored. I visited there, and the Napoleonic bastions and walls, a lot of them are also preserved because there was a history who has read about the Peninsular War or played games like Wellington by Mark McLaughlin, indeed Sharp books, knows lots of history going on. Great atmospheric place for a con, great things to tour around town from a military history point of view, which certainly we took advantage of. And for me, it was particularly
Volko,
a special.
yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry because of the time. Maybe we can see the photos of the convention itself because
Sure.
we are a bit long on the time. Sorry.
Okay, so here we are. This is my researcher with Spaniards, a Briton, and an Abu Dhabi wargamer working on testing my Almoravid game, Bad Hoof from the map. The art is done by Checho Nieto for the game board, Ivan Catharis, Spaniards also. And by the way, kind of coincidence, Checho Nieto had been doing all my maps, not just Spanish. It has been, I think, a hot laboratory of Spanish game designers producing. These are all designers testing their games at BellotteCon, and these are all games, or let's say most of them are well known in the United States or known in the United States. And also, I want to just give a nod quickly to the importance of the content creators here. Like Los Abuelos, the grandfathers, Yolanda Luque of Anales de Cubo. They are bringing this experience of BellotteCon out to the wargame communities and giving that coverage. And particularly important that on the is Stuka Joe, who was born in Spain, but a Puerto Rican for a U.S. person. Bridge between the U.S. and Spain because he would do reporting from BellotteCon and translation. This is so just again a real highway of distribution of the interest and thinking about game innovation. And so I just kind of went and looked back, like what are the games that have been fascinating me as a player and as a designer. And they're not necessarily, it's not just Spanish designers about Spanish topics or Italian designers about Italian topics. Yes, that matters, but it's actually, I think, something more to do with a different approach to innovating, including some of what you've heard here, that we might get from a European designer versus a US designer. And I just say that fascinating. Thank you. Looking at my snapshots. Bye.
Thank you, Volko. Thank you, Volko. Really. And thanks in particular for the mention as a content creator to content creators. And also Jan is a great content creator, and many of them on this channel, on this event. Okay, so now it's the turn of Ronald Shepard. Okay, now we're diving into professional wargames territory, commercial off-the-shelf wargames, and professional development. You have the floor.
Ricardo, thank you, and good evening from Scotland to everybody. My name's Ranald, and in terms of context and so on, and why I wrote the chapter I did, my background is I'm an Army veteran. I served for 34 years, and I'm a professional wargamer. And I'm very much coming at wargaming from the whole perspective of the study of war, with my background. And when I wrote or decided to write this piece, what was the driving sort of factors behind it? Well, it was that whole bit about Europe's quite lucky. 2 decades of the 21st century, we haven't really had war. And how important it is that we study war in the European context. Is war likely to happen, and so on? And I actually drafted the article, with that context. And of course, since drafting back in sort of 2020, 2021, we've had the war in Ukraine. We've had Russian aggression against a European neighbour, and it really brought into focus us as Europeans how war is on our doorstep, and the importance of the study of war. And my background was very much, yes, you could study war through many different ways, in terms of educational training and so on. Traditionally, of course, it's passive learning. It is go into a lecture, have an academic tell you about the history of war, read a book, listen to someone that's deployed on operations. It's all passive learning. I'm a hobby wargamer of long standing as well, and there was a push, certainly within the British Army, to do more wargaming. And that's like paradox in right at the beginning. You guys, Jan, Ricardo, Fred, you made the point that wargaming started in the military, in the Prussian military, but now it's gone, very much commercial, very much civil, and now it's the bit where the military dimension trying to maybe learn from what the civil dimension does. So it's that kind of full 360 degrees coming back in. So the idea was, how could you use war games to study war for professional development? And that was the start of a journey. My chapter sort of goes through that. I'm just going to look at sharing a couple of slides if I can. Let me know if this works, guys. If it doesn't, we'll stop. Is that coming through? Is that come through at all?
No, can't see it.
No.
Okay, let's just get rid of that. Don't worry about it. We'll take that out. And what we did, myself and a colleague, is we wanted to find a war game that we could run with military staff that we worked alongside, and also civilian staff that worked alongside military staff as well. One of the traditions, in military circles is to design your own war games. Do something that's really relevant to what you're talking about. But we just didn't have the time to go and do that. So what could you pull off the shelf, a commercial war game off the shelf that you could use to do that? Obviously, there's limitations. You've got people that aren't war gamers. You've only got so much size. You've only got so much time, and so on. And what we landed on, which was pertinent at the time, this is sort of 2018, 2019. And the two designers are in this chat room here. It was Volker's and Brian's A Distant Plane. It had relevance to people around that table, and it worked. And we ran that, and the training objectives included a better understanding of Afghanistan, better understanding of counterinsurgency, but also the chance to develop decision making, the chance to collaborate and partner with other people as well. And some of that skill set, some of those competencies, overlap with the civilian side as well. Can you make decisions under pressure? And we put together a questionnaire at the end, and it was very positive, the feedback. One of the great quotes got back from one of the military guys who'd been out there probably as a young lieutenant. And of course, he'd been focused right on the tactical level, but having a war game that covered the whole of Afghanistan, and in the wider political context as well, he said, I'm looking at a block on that map, and I was just one atom within that block. And now I'm, there to learn about the the kind of wider scene. So we ran that successful. I looked at running it again. Paradoxically, I was deployed out to Afghanistan, but hey, I could take it with me. It was commercial off the shelf, pack the box, take it out there, and I ran it out there with NATO colleagues. So we had representatives from a number of different nations, and we ran it out there, and once again to really positive feedback. So we proved that you could use commercial off-the-shelf war games. People found it beneficial in terms of developing professional skills, but perhaps one of the key things is people enjoyed it. It's that whole bit about active learning, not just sitting, listening to people. I know you guys are listening to me. We should be playing a game. That'd be a better way to learn about it. But yeah, that was the whole point of it and so on. I also, in my chapter, talk about how I used war games as part of battlefield studies research. Battlefield studies, not a battlefield tour. People who come out in it have to participate. They have to contribute to discussion, lead on the stand, or whatever it might be. And this was the whole period of the First World War centenary. So, almost like 10 years ago. But I found when I was leading those studies, and I acted as a student mentor, and I ran studies as well, that yes, I read much and in detail, but setting up games and moving pieces, things just clicked in my head. It was that whole bit about active learning. And then I also took that in to help prepare people going out onto the ground around certain games so that people could, once again, experience that same bit about. I mean, one of the comments you get from people was saying, wow, when you look at 1914, the British Army is really quite small on the Western Front. We're very, very centric to our own country's histories and so on. But when they looked at the huge forces, they thought, yeah, okay, the British Army was quite small in 1914. So surprise, surprise, the French are dictating how you're going to fight in 1914 because they've got the biggest army. But just seeing that, the penny drops in people's mind. And we used that when we were out on the ground. People referred back to war games when we were out on the ground. So I'm a great advocate for playing games, using games. I believe they've got real benefit for for professional development, not just military, but civilian skills as well, decision making, collaborating and partnering, and so on. And then my final point was, most of us here are from a European background. We've talked about history earlier. We've got massive history in terms of conflict between our different nations across our continent, and so on. And it really pays to study that history through wargaming to help us face the challenges that we face at the moment and that we might face in the future. And then the very final point was, a lot of the games are US. Yes, I used some European developed ones, some from Nuts Publishing as well. But my thoughts are perhaps there needs to be more European produced war games. It's a slightly different perspective, and they can go hand in glove with the North American North American perspective. I know since I've produced my contribution, things like we've got more war games from VUCA, slightly different viewpoint, Venta Nuovo, Phalanx, and so on. Okay,
Thanks.
that's me. Thanks for
Thank
listening.
you, guys. Sorry, it's a bit crowded here, but now it's the turn of Giuseppe Tam about the new resurgence of the Italian war game.
Hi guys, everybody. And just a few seconds to say thank you really to Riccardo, to Jan, and to Fred in order to have invited me to this panel and to have put so many efforts in the volume published after all. Well, my contribution in the volume is about such an aerial photograph of the Italian panorama of wargaming, which is quite interesting, I think, in Europe, because if you have listened to the Volko interventions some minutes ago, well, forget it. In Italy, it's completely different matter. what is the particular of the Italian wargaming community? The main thing you have to remember from a USA point of view, for example, or from Canadian point of view, that in Italy we are very few war gamers, not gamers. There are many people gaming, and Riccardo and Andrea, for example, are two pillars in gaming community in Italy, trying to bringing more people playing games and historical games. But from wargaming point of view, we are a small community. And this is, you must understand that this important topic, because this topic shapes all the aspects of the wargaming living in Italy. I mean, we have no convention like Bad Health. When I wrote Volkov's paper, I was very envy of what friend, Spanish friends have in Spain. We have anything like that. I was not in Badajoz, but I was a couple of times in Batalladores in Zaragoza, and they are very united community. One friend told me, we are Catalan, we are from Aragona, we are from Andalusia, we are from Navarra, and so on. But when there is a national event, we are all Spanish after all. Yeah? We have to support the hobby. This is very important because in Italy is not like this the situation. And what is the main reflex on the market and on the production? That we have many small producers. I count around 10 publisher of war games, but they are all small company, probably one-man band, two-man, not so many people, and the production is very limited. This does not mean that is low quality. Don't be fooled by this. But the production is not even comparable in any way to GMT, for example, or even from other company in Europe, like NEC, for example, or Malkeoka. We are very dispersed. You know, Italy is long, is a long peninsula, and even in this case, it's not easy to find a center of balance in order to find a convention place that may be suitable for people to move and attend. And that's why we have many local events that till now have not catalyzed in one big national convention that you can find a lot of people playing like in Badajoz or in Batalladores. This is a pity because, on the other hand, we have some particular in our way of wargaming, let's say. Volko said that European wargaming is interesting because it has innovative approach and a different approach. And I subscribe it because as in all our national history, are the individual person that make the difference. So we have very, not so many, but very talented guys as designers that may do the difference in Europe from the quality point of view. What I mean, think about guys like Sergio Schiavi of the Simula edition, which is a very talented guy from designing because this game has very interesting new approach, very nice graphic, very interesting system. And in a few years, he was able to have a particular niche through Kickstarter and campaigns in order to be known abroad. For example, another Italian excellence, I don't know if I can say it's still Italian after all, but it's Fabrizio Vianello of Thin Red Line, Fabrizio has focused particularly on Third World War games, but from a very particular technical point of view. He revamped some old titles of SPI during the 80s, and he made a new order of battles, new maps, new graphics, after all. And it made a very interesting model of business because it's a sort of print of demand, and the number of the games that are made by the customer who write directly to him in order to have the games, and so he can focus his production exactly on the number of copies needed. But after all, we have many interesting guys. For example, we have Zancani, which made a lot of historical and solitaire games, which is very appreciated. Arrigo Villicogna, but I like to mention in this small crowd Nicola Saggini, because Nicola, I think, is one of the most interesting and brilliant new wave designers, let's say. Nicola has had a collaboration with DFG for his game about Stealth and Sea, the MS operator in World War II, but now is an author by SNAFU Design in Catalonia, and made very interesting games. So I think you will be hear about him in the future again. And what can I have also finished my time, but what I can say more? We have just one big wargame convention, and not so big, as you know. It's in Latina, Piano delle Orme, so I invite you. But we have many convention with many, let's say, commercial and other kind of game present. So I invite you to come to Italy and visit us, because it's easy after all to meet us, because we are not so much. So
Thank you.
Riccardo, thanks
Thank you,
again,
Giuseppe.
and have a good day.
Also to complete a bit your, since we have Volko in the room and he worked with the guy I'm going to mention now, Enrico Acerbi, who designed Inferno in the Levy and
Oh
Company
yes,
series,
sure.
among others. And also, if you want, yeah, we also have a virtual convention with in March 16th in Italy. It is the virtual Ludostoricon. And I know that because I'm setting it up. But after the great virtual convention, online convention that was made by Giuseppe with the Federazione Italiana Wargame, the Wargame Italian Federation, the Italian Wargame Federation, and so yeah, there are lots of stuff happening here. Okay, we have almost finished our time, but we have time for the last contribution, and that is Brian Train. We all know him, and his contribution. Okay, let me find. Okay, analog news games. Yeah, the issue, the topic of news games. This very particular but very fascinating topic about war games and simulation. Brian, you have the floor for the last intervention.
Thank you, Riccardo. I'll try to be as fast as I can, because we're just about at the end of our time here. So I've been designing analog war games for the civilian market for about 30 years. So far, I've published over 65 titles. Many of my games are about conflicts that occurred during those 30 years I've been working. Many of them were designed not long after the actual events, and sometimes even during the conflict itself. My motivation in doing this is to try to make sense of the world I live in, and to share this understanding with other people through games. And in doing this, makes them mature or citizen journalism, where the author presents an issue in an interactive format. Ranald talked earlier about this being an interactive way of learning about history. And because a game is presented through a set of rules that allow other people to discover and explore the event or the issue through, unlike other forms of citizen journalism, we encounter videos or podcasts, it's much more interactive context and a selective representation of its discussion, argument, and variation by the players. So in my piece in the book, I presented historical and current examples of analog games and their various uses under the general objectives of journalism, and also commenting on them as very dense artifacts of popular culture that exemplify or certainly criticize the culture they come from. And I wanted to specify analog news games because even though the word news game was invented by Gonzalo Frasca over 20 years ago, and Ian Bogost wrote a whole book about news games in 2011, they were talking about video and computer games. Neither writer acknowledged the practice of publishing such news games far, far predated the internet, far, far predated computers. I found historical examples going back to 1661. And barely 10 years after writing his book, Ian Bogost published an article in which he declared the news game moribund. You know, from beginning to end, he had never acknowledged this. It's well known that this area, academic area of cultural studies, particularly in the United States, is almost completely devoted to computer and video games. It's persistently and, in my view, disgracefully ignorant, both of its analog history and the analog games that continue to be published alongside of digital games. It seems to be different in Europe. Anyway, in my piece, I presented examples of three types of games in general classes. First is a classical game design that's given a reskinning to make a critical or a satirical point, which is something about the level of an editorial cartoon that you'd find in a newspaper or magazine. So examples I found here were like reskinnings of Le Jeu de Roi, the Goose Game, or for American audiences, Monopoly, which is a basic game that many people learn when they're children. So you have the rules and mechanics down already, and then you just reskin the game. The second type is an original but mechanically simple game that makes an obvious polemical point. This would be about the level of an editorial in a newspaper or an opinion piece. I presented examples of games on campus violence, strikes, politics, corruption, austerity, pollution, that kind of thing. And then the third and most ambitious category is a closely researched and mechanically complex simulation game, the kind of war game that we're familiar with in this audience, and that resembles kind of a data-heavy special feature or analytic piece that still kind of appears occasionally in magazines or specialized journals. And there I presented examples, particularly from my own work, games about, for example, the Battle of Seattle, the anti-WTO riots in 1999, a game that I did on the Ukrainian crisis that I designed in 2014 over the length of a weekend, games on the Kashmir crisis, Gaza, the Gaza missile crisis of 2012. There are some examples of this kind of thing. Not too many, but they're out there. And as I noted in the piece, personal computers and the internet have made the creation and the distribution of these kinds of games possible, and maybe not popular, but certainly possible through print and play. So it's been possible for some time for a person who's motivated to produce and distribute an analog news game on a particular topic far faster than the video news games that Ian Bogost was writing about in his book, and which he declared dead, 10 years later, because it couldn't be done fast enough, and he couldn't figure out any way to make it pay. So anyway, the problem with being timely in this sort of thing is that you can also often be wrong. People tend to look for answers and predictions and these kinds of things, but I think they're there to kind of explore the problem space. And what they will teach you is that the contemporary world can be a lot more complicated than you think, or that your understanding of the situation or the designer's understanding of the situation was quite wrong. But again, that's one of the major purposes of journalism after all, isn't it? Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Very kind with your timing. Also, too bad that we do not have here today Alonge and Fassone, who wrote a piece about Corteo. That was an Italian game about urban insurrections. That you mentioned, Brian. That you mentioned in many of your works and studies. So our time really is up. Unfortunately, we don't have time for the questions from the public, but we will publish this video, and so you will be able to comment, to make questions on the comment, and we will relay that to the contributors. Last thing, the book is out. It has been published. It is available on the Nuts Publishing online store. I want to thank everybody here, all the contributors. Thanks to Jan. Thanks to the SD ISKCON Online. Thanks to Florian Coupeau for having had this mad idea of financing at last the publication of this project. Also thanks to Federludo, that is the Italian convention, board game convention, in which I'm here at the Federludocon, and I want to thank Federludo for having made this live possible with the Hotel structures. Thanks to everybody, and see you around. Bye. Ciao.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.